Hello. Yeah, it's on. Are those the other ones on, Paula? Okay. Okay. So. Okay. Huh? You're ready. Yeah, I'm ready. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry, please. Thank you, Gillian. Hello. Welcome to the day 4 of programming at the Water Pavilion. Very nice to be here. And I'm Mariana Borges, the Water for Landscapes Manager at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Today's theme is nature, and more specifically, nature-based solutions. And we will be going through why they are so vital for climate adaptation and mitigation throughout the day. And so what we would like to do is in this opening session is to give you a first overview of why we're talking about nature in the Water Pavilion and specifically nature-based solutions. And to get us started, I have the great pleasure to invite here to speak to us Gillian Caldwell, who is USAID's Climate Change Coordinator and Deputy Assistant Administrator. Gillian, the floor is yours.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Yes, you can, of course. I hear myself. As was indicated, my name's Gillian Caldwell, and I'm really honored to be here with my colleagues to talk about water and nature-based solutions. As we all know, water really nourishes life. It has this undeniable power. It has the power to help us feed ourselves and to feed our crops. And it also has the power to destroy the homes in which we live. And as the climate crisis grows in its intensity, of course, we're seeing the impacts on water, whether it's droughts, floods, typhoons, or any other of the challenges we're witnessing in terms of the damage to the infrastructure that supports water, and especially clean drinking water. I'm going to talk about solutions because we are here to talk about solutions, but before I do, I just wanted to offer a few pretty tough predictions. One is that by 2030, 130 million people will be driven into poverty by water shortages. And by 2050, more than 5 billion people will not have water for at least an entire month a year. At the same time, another 20%, 1 in 5 of the world's population will be impacted by flooding. So we'll have the scarcity in some places and a dangerous overabundance in others. And of course, this drives migration. People will go where they can find the water, which creates all sorts of instability in the places they leave behind. And if they stay behind, this can precipitate conflict, which needs to be anticipated so that resource sharing and management can be in place. So it's a grim picture when it comes to water, and at the same time, the solutions are all around us in nature. Think about biomimicry, which is all about the possibility to try to replicate the beautiful perfection of nature, which we have, so drastically destroyed in so many parts of the world. So nature-based solutions are really critical to USAID's new strategy. We've just put a draft up on November 3rd, and we really welcome your comments. This is a climate strategy that will take us through 2030. And we've got some very ambitious goals under that strategy with nature-based solutions as a central component. Our Water for World initiative, for example, is really taking a systems-level approach to try to accelerate and protect the hard-won gains in water security and sanitation. In Peru, working to mobilize funding to focus on forest and wetland conservation and improve grazing practices. And in India, really working to manage the forests and the multiple ecological systems that surround them that help us regulate the water so many times, so much more effectively than the so-called gray infrastructure like dams, which humans build. You may also have heard that President Biden announced the PREPARE initiative, which is the Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, the Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. It's a US government-wide initiative with very ambitious goals to help ensure the resilience of 500 million people by 2030. And as part of that, USAID is committed to mobilizing at least $1 billion in climate-resilient water sanitation services by 2030. So water and nature-based solutions are absolutely central to the way forward, and we're proud to really lean into that reality as we move forward with our climate strategy in the year to come. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much, Gillian. It's a pleasure to have you. And just to say that Nature Day is co-organized or co-curated by my organization, IUCN, but also by the WWF and the Nature Conservancy. And so I will now have the pleasure to welcome Marcine Mitchell, who is Senior Vice President for Climate Change at WWF, who will give some opening remarks as well.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you, Gillian. We just heard how important and challenged we have in terms of water going forward into the future. And what I'd like to talk to you about is the role that nature can play in terms of preserving and conserving our water resources. Nature, when harnessed, can be a powerful tool to both reduce the impact of climate exacerbated disasters and also sequester carbon. So we must keep nature in front of mind, both as a vital tool to help us address the climate crisis and ensure that we stay committed to conserving our ecosystems and their inhabitants, even as we rise to the challenge of climate goals. Climate change will mostly impact our communities, cities, and companies through water. 90% of natural disasters are water-related. Yet safeguarding the health of the world's rivers, lakes, and wetlands remains way down on the list of global priorities. We can become more resilient to climate impacts if governments and businesses pursue water policies. We need to recognize the full value of healthy freshwater systems as a nature-based solution to climate change. So we are pleased that the Biden administration is committing to adaptation through its new investments in USAID, which they've announced here at COP. Healthy and connected floodplains can reduce the impact of extreme floods by absorbing excess water and buffering downstream communities and cities. Healthy wetlands are important as they maintain water flows during droughts. Natural sediments in rivers are essential to sustaining our most mangrove forests, which protect coastal communities. And natural sediment flows in rivers are essential to keeping dynamic deltas from sinking and shrinking and ensuring they stay above rising sea levels. So protecting these freshwater ecosystems will help countries reach their adaptation goals in their NDCs. But we have to urgently manage our rivers, our lakes, and our wetlands, and particularly, of course, through nature-based solutions. We need to make sure our financial flows are directed to these sustainable investments, and there needs to bring in nature-based solutions into the system on a large scale. We need to scale up as part of adaptations. So one of the barriers that we are facing is this funding. And we thank USAID for stepping up and putting more funding into this area. And it's important to properly identify who else's problem of NBS is solving in order to get more people willing to pay for it. So it's really a call to action. Everyone needs to be involved in the climate and the water world. There are some practical steps I'd like to propose. One, political leaders must invest in adaptive institutional capacity, implementing protections, and promote nature-based solutions. The private sector must recognize the importance of water and the risk climate change brings to businesses. Collective action is needed. And I'd like to emphasize on that last point, so many corporations are dependent on these natural water resources and need to incorporate that as part of their climate and their risk management systems. Civil society, all of us, must demand a change to infrastructure development. And finally, the research and academia must raise awareness for opportunities and research the results of using nature-based solutions. So what is WWF doing? I'll give you a few examples of our existing work of enabling nature-based solutions. So in the greater Mekong and other Asian deltas, we are working to protect and restore rivers, wetlands, and lakes so they can provide better buffers to climate impact. We are doing this through a system-scale planning approach with stakeholders across river basins to build nature-based solutions into their infrastructure planning and water governance. So it's about putting in the planning for nature-based, not going to the gray infrastructure, but really in the planning process, incorporating nature-based solutions. In Pakistan, we have a program called Recharge Pakistan, which is building Pakistan's resilience to climate change, again, through ecosystem-based adaptation for integrated flood risk management. The Indus River is Pakistan's lifeline and is now experiencing catastrophic floods and droughts exacerbated by climate change. Pakistan relies on costly, hard infrastructure right now, flood and water management measures with limited efficacy. This project will build Pakistan's climate resilience and water security through cost-effective ecosystem-based adaptation. Recharge Pakistan will increase water storage and recharge through wetlands, floodplains, hill torrents management. It will promote climate-adapted community-based natural resource management and livelihoods, and it will forge a paradigm shift to scale up this approach. So this project unifies several government entities in an unprecedented collaboration with WWF Pakistan to affect nature-based solutions for crucial climate change. So again, it is shifting our minds, our paradigm from putting in gray, expensive infrastructure into using nature-based, such as floodplains, such as hill torrents, other things of that. And then finally, in Africa, we have a report that shows that water-related risks are projected to rise in Africa. For example, the proportion of Africa's population right now living in high-risk flooding areas is 23%, but it's projected to more than double to 54% by 2050. And not just the proportion is rising, but as we know, Africa's population is increasing to by about 1 billion people during that same time frame. So this increase in proportion of people living in areas with high flood risk translates into 800 million people, more people at risk. However, most of Africa's floodplains are undeveloped. And while other countries are recognizing that we've occupied too much of the historic floodplains and are putting too many people and property at risk, building levees too close to rivers, and now we need to move them back. African countries have the chance to get it right the first time. Fully integrate nature-based solutions into the floodplains as a way to ensure safety when investing in infrastructure. Our report found that by 2040, 40% of Africa's GDP will be coming from areas of high-risk water scarcity. So many reports of rising climate risk and news stories of floods and drought. It seems that the power of nature is arrayed against our homes and communities. But if we invest in nature-based solutions, we can get the power of nature on our side. So thank you. Think about this paradigm shift. Think about how we can do it right, particularly in places like Africa, where we don't have to put in that infrastructure. We can learn from the path that we have done in many other places, and we can protect people going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcin. And now I would like to welcome Leonardo Lacerda, TNC's Global Managing Director for Climate Change. The floor is yours, Leonardo.
I just moved back from Switzerland to Brazil after almost 30 years to realize that the little river where I spent a lot of my time, some of my best time together with my friends and family, just swimming, particularly during the very hot months of winter, because that's when it is in Brazil, no longer runs for 3 months. And because of mismanagement of water, but also because we have at least 3 more weeks of the dry season that is taking place on this area in Cerrado. So just to say that these things are no longer just projections for the future. They're really hitting us nowadays. We see that there are more than 65,000 people daily being displaced because of climate change, and a lot of them in coastal areas that are being impacted by storms and so on and so forth. So there's also, what I wanted to say here is that there's also a sentimental thing that is also linked to this, and I hope that it will not be going to a place where we say a baseline shift. My children will not know what I experienced, and so that world didn't exist. We need to keep that, saying that yes, that world exists, and we want it differently. So it is a real pleasure to be here. I've been going to so many COPs, and this is the first one that we have this. And this has to do with how much the conservation community has been able to bring the issue of nature-based solutions to the fore. You know, we have identified that 30% of the mitigation that is needed by 2030 can come from nature-based solutions, and so an important part of that from water. So very happy to be here. And these solutions are both for mitigation and adaptation, and my colleagues have addressed that. Our ambition at TNC is at least 2 that I'd like to share. First is that these nature-based solutions become really core of the NDCs of each country. We have been working with a number of countries. We have been working actually with 5, and you have in Colombia, for example, a fantastic example. They had committed only to reduce by 20% of their emissions by 2030, but having carried out an analysis on their NBS, or their nature-based solutions, they could up that to 51%. And it's not only adding the challenge, but actually delivering. You probably have been seeing how in this meeting, Colombia is really coming up with delivery on these commitments that they have made. So we need to be sure that the water aspect, restoration of riverine forests and all of the other dimensions that was at here, mangroves and so on, are well incorporated into that. And the second ambition we have is with respect to climate finance. We've been seeing a lot of announcements here. We want to be sure that, particularly those that are related to forests and so on, more funding, that some of that actually comes to support the water-related NBS, or nature-based solutions. And I'd like to share with you 2 examples, very concrete examples of how TNC has been working on this theme. The first is through the creation and management of these creative mechanisms called water funds. Water funds, it's not only about the funds, but it's also bringing management to freshwater systems through governance when these government systems were not there, governance systems were not there. And so it's a way of paying for ecosystems systems, those that are downstream paying for those that are protecting the watershed upstreams. And in Latin America, for example, we have, since 2011, created 26 of such schemes that are working really well. The program that has been financed by the Inter-American Development Bank, by FEMSA Foundation, the GF and ICI, that is the German International Climate Initiative, has been renewed in 2017, and we're now adding at least 6 more of such schemes in Latin America. And it has supported hundreds of thousands of farmers upstream and millions of people downstream that are water users. A second example that I like to provide is on the Mantiqueira range in Brazil. In the Mantiqueira is the mountain range that produces the water to 2 megalopolis in Brazil, São Paulo and Rio. So at least more than 20 million people living in these areas. And in this area, we have been supporting forest restoration. We have already restored more than 107,000 hectares of native endangered Atlantic forests. And our ambition is to restore 1.2 million hectares more. With a direct benefit for the water provision for these large cities. And what we've learned is that on the financing side, there is no silver bullet. We have to resort to water funds, but also we have been resorting to carbon offsets and to a pool of different mechanisms. And I think it's difficult not to say that down the line we need to integrate watershed protection and forest restoration costs into water tariff. Those are very difficult things. They have social implications, but we need to find creative ways of dealing with that. And as we move forward, I would like to express just 2 wishes. The first is that we extend the NBS idea to many more countries' NDCs, to see that effect of what has happened in Colombia be multiplied, and that the nature-based solutions become on par and seen as investable things, just as gray infrastructure is. Nowadays it's like, oh no, this is investment on environment. No, it is investment on water resources, on water provision, just as gray infrastructure. So that is our hope, and we're eager to continue and starting new partnerships with USAID, WWF, IUCN, and many that are here, and others that are listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonardo. And now I have the pleasure to invite Chris Buss, the director of IUCN Center for Economy and Finance. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mariana. And start with apologies, Mariana, one for being late, but also 2, you made some excellent notes, but Marcin and Leonardo, I think, have covered them. So, I'll try and go a little bit off script, actually. I went out for supper the other night, and I heard this wonderful phrase, re-wriggling. Try not to say that with something in your mouth. And so I said, well, what is re-wriggling? And it's putting rivers back into their natural state. And it was quite interesting, because where I live in Switzerland, there was a lot of hard infrastructure in Switzerland, and where I walk my dog, they've actually started ripping out that hard infrastructure and re-wriggling the rivers. And not only is it fantastic for walking your dogs, it's also, you can just immediately see nature coming back into that area. It's Dully, if you want to go and visit, Mariana. It's great. It's a great little project, but it is only a little project. But immediately you can see the nature coming back in, and so, But it is a small project in a small village in Switzerland, and that doesn't sort of do. When you start re-wriggling, but it's the scale we need to be thinking about. And in one thing that I've always been impressed with, and one of the challenges in the water sector is looking at the scale, whether it be a river basin, watershed management, etc. And then when I was being asked for today, it said it was Nature Day. Well, Nature Day is on Saturday, according to the programme. But actually, who cares, really? Because, one of the things, it's nature all the way through. And it's actually great to be, I think the thrust of the discussions that we've been having is that nature is centre and for all our responses. When you talk about, and when we look at nature-based solutions, I think that, if we look at what was coming out of the discussions on particularly the World Leaders Summit on Tuesday, I mean, that's been massive shift on nature and climate. If you go back 10 years, those discussions and those announcements wouldn't have happened. So, I think where we are now in relation to nature and climate, and that water nexus, the essential role that water plays, not just for economies and for populations, but also for a biodiverse landscape, whether it be in the wetlands or downstream in deltas, etc. I think is a massive critical role. One of the things that we've been working on at IUCN is you've already mentioned nature-based solutions, and it's really refreshing to hear that as a really strong thread coming through. But we've been developing the nature-based solutions standard, and it was launched last year in August, and the uptake has been amazing. And the standard was really designed as a facilitatory tool for policymakers, implementers, to go through a set of criteria to understand how we're trying to deliver nature-based solutions. So we're not just focused on one or two specific areas, but we are looking at the broader context of all the different of the 8 criteria that are in the standard. And over the last year, we've been rolling that out and testing it in various countries. And one of the lead countries actually has been the UK with the Environmental Agency. And they've been applying it in different areas where they have been. And there's some events coming up and next week, if people are still around, with the Environmental Agency, that will demonstrate some of the outcomes of that, and it's been positive. And at the heart of the nature-based solutions is biodiversity returns, and making sure we get those. And I think that's something that, even though we're working at a fundamental scale that we always at the heart of it is getting those returns on nature and the benefits that we get from there. And then just finally, Leonardo, you talked about forest landscape restoration. I'm a forester by trade, and one of the challenges we've always had in the forest landscape restoration is people then focus, oh, you're just planting trees. So the water sector has always been a bit of a challenge in saying, well, you're just planting trees. But one of my favorite examples is the work for water in South Africa, where actually you're removing trees because of to restore ecosystem functionality. And of course, because of the black wattle was just draining the watercourse, so there's been programs of removing that. And I think that's the type of interventions that we're looking at to one, restore ensure we have water security, but also to ensure we're having strong returns on nature. So hopefully I'll be able to stop in a few times today and listen to water and nature and hear what's happening, because without water there's no nature, and vice versa. So and thank you for the opportunity to open this, and wish you the best of luck for the rest of the day. Thanks, Mariana.
What a good start to our 4th day at COP26 and our Water Pavilion. Thanks, panelists. Thanks, Mariana and IUCN, WWF, and TNC for arranging this. What we heard this morning, what I heard, I'm, by the way, Torgny Holmgren, I'm head of Stockholm International Water Institute, CV. What I heard this morning is that water is key part of climate solution, and water resilience is also building climate and economic resilience as well. It's part of the climate solution. We started off with some grim prospects for the future Well, lack to access of clean water, flooding, driving migration, displacement of people, mainly in low-income countries. But there is a solution, at least a major part of the solution that has still not been used to its full capacity. Use NBS or nature-based solutions, not only to sequester carbon, but also the future to handle the climate change, both in adaptation, I will also claim mitigation rights or approaches. We need renewed water policies on freshwater, floodplains, wetlands, mangrove, coastal zones, national sediments, or natural sediments, I would say, as well as rising sea level. People are being displaced, and we got some numbers this morning. What could happen? And we are right here now to make it not happen. Finance was discussed. Of course, there is still rather slim lines of finance going to NBS, but I think it's up to us also to show the evidence what NBS can bring, because there is not lack of finance in the world, that is for sure. What we have to prove to make a systemic approach that we bring in NBS in that, and go for nature-based solutions rather than grey infrastructure in the future. On finance, it was mentioned both water funds, carbon offsets. I think what you mentioned about integrate the costs into the water tariffs, quite interesting, because still water is quite cheap for companies and public sector also to, well, if I compare to energy prices. Anyway, for the future, this is a collective action, public-private. See more. We should work for more infrastructure investments in not in grey, but in green or in nature-based solutions, and incorporate nature-based solutions rather than grey, and less concrete barriers, more NBS. I would like to quote the head of UNEP, Inger Andersson. We should have a new compact with nature. I think that is the bottom line for what we're doing. Work with, not against nature. And as mentioned, NBS or nature-based solutions is part, and it's being a part of our nationally determined contributions in weeks and years to come. So thanks a lot, IUCN, WDF, and TNC for arranging this. And have a good day at the Water Pavilion and here at COP in Glasgow.